Hi everyone. Wanted to address some questions and stuff about fear and darkness and the shadow parts of self and how we integrate and address it. Someone was asking about releasing fear and all of these feelings and how to kind of get past them. And the short answer to like how do we do that is it takes forever. It takes a long time. We're learning to kind of coexist with these things, and it's not so much that we just make fear disappear. It's how we change our relationship to it. And when fear, anxiety, anger, all these things are greeted as adversarial, which is often what like a westernized medicine kind of model would say, like we have to cure this, we have to eradicate this, we have to cut and fracture this out, versus what a more Eastern model might suggest, or even modern psychology. A lot of the schools of thought in there, it's a lot more about how do we get to know this? What is it trying to teach us? What would it be like to change our relationship to fear? Because fear will not go away. Fear is a biological instinct that keeps us alive. Sadness is something that, again, like I said in the handout, is something that shows us what's important to us, that gives us meaning, that shows us that something mattered enough that it hurts when it's away. Anger is an empowerment emotion. It's a secondary emotion. So usually anger is layered on top of something else. Feeling disadvantaged or taken advantage of or hurt or victimized or something like that, or jealous. Like anger allows us to go forth and do stuff. Trying to think what else. Yeah, fear is a big one too. Again, it keeps us alive, or it has. Sometimes it can become maladaptive when any one of these things becomes overpowered. So a lot of this shadow work isn't to like let these forces out and have them wreak havoc and take control of our lives, but to start to learn what messages they're sending. What is the root cause underneath all of these things? What is the real fear? We often have therapy, we call it like the presenting problem. When someone comes in about like something like, I'm upset because my husband doesn't clean the dishes. And like when you like sift down to whatever it is, it's like, I'm afraid of not being respected. I'm afraid of my time not being honored. I'm afraid of not being valued, whatever it is deep down there. Or, fear is, loss of control or loss of love or whatever that root issue is. Once we discover that, we can see how it ripples out into the rest of our lives. And again, the discovery of this can take some time, can take some serious critical work, sometimes just sitting with it though. If we go into meditation and just watch it, what arises, what themes keep coming up, we can get a better clue into what's actually going on in our mind and our hearts. Again, this is where our dreams come in, where they often give these unconscious messages about what you actually want or what you're actually dealing with. Even though they are much more convoluted and in a language that we are not used to speaking, which is symbols. So again, that's part of why I had the mandala drawing assignment, just to play around with what is it like to be nonverbal. You don't have to necessarily draw. You could pick up an instrument and get nonverbal, see what comes out from that, if that's something that's in your repertoire of things you do. Another question, someone asked about the shadow and healing and integration and stuff. Basically, is it good to get rid of those shadow things, or are they a part of our fullness? And again, I would say that these things are part of our fullness. About bringing the darkness to light can make us fuller, deeper human beings that have more understanding of this dichotomy. Because no matter what we do, no matter how hard we try, there will be light and there will be dark. There's periods of happiness that are made sweet because we know that feeling of sadness. And I don't wish that on anybody. I don't want that. I don't want to feel like crap. Nobody does. But they're essential to the full development of a human being, to feel the full spectrum of emotions. We can't have true compassion and empathy until we have felt those spectrum of things as well. When we think about, there's an interesting study where some people got Botox, and it was found that those people actually had a lower instance of depression, interestingly enough. But they also didn't feel other emotions as strongly either. So it was kind of like a numbing. I know depression can be a numbing itself too, but It was just something where like it was very flat and the experience was taken away. Part of that was to display that emotions have to do with our facial expressions and the way in which we can imitate and mimic other people due to something called mirror neurons. But that's a whole other workshop. But the point being that the spectrum of emotions are really important and powerful. Another interesting thing about shadow stuff, it's not just like our negative parts that get repressed and shut down. It could also be like the superpowers in us that we don't dare own or believe that are us. Like that natural born leader, if you're very quiet and shy and timid, that could be living in there and terrifying you that you don't want to acknowledge. Like, I can do this, or this capacity is within me innately. That can be a big part of shadow work as well, of identifying that big, powerful light being inside of you. It can go either way. We can dwell too much in the darkness, which is something important to note too. It's not what I'm advocating at all. It's more about how do we see the fullness of self? What can these things be teaching us? We can avoid our fear. We can avoid these things and just push them away, and it works, like, for a time. But these messages want to be heard, because once we see them, we can start to address them in whatever way that we choose to. And in this practice in particular, it's not so much this radical changing work. It's just about learning to see it and using our coping skills, like breathing and meditating and relaxing, to see these parts of ourselves, see these desires that it could be either something you deem, negative by society, or something very powerful and beautiful in you that you are scared to receive. Yourself as a leader, yourself as a lover, yourself as a healer, yourself as a change maker. These things are living in you too in the shadow realm if they haven't emerged yet. And what you dream about, what you daydream about, what comes out when you write, what comes up when you meditate. These things can be very powerful. Another thing I might recommend too, if you get a chance, is to try to do a salt float. If you're not too claustrophobic or too afraid of the dark. I am afraid of both of those things. I hate small spaces and I hate total darkness, funny enough. But I did it a couple years ago and I'd like to revisit it again, going into, it's like a tank of water. Usually it's filled with salt and you just float effortlessly. And there's no sound, there's no light. However, the place I went to, you could turn on LED lights if you wanted to, and you could have it open a little bit if you wanted to have that kind of security. But in that space, all kinds of stuff emerges. Our brain will create content when none is there. So you might even start to see things, which I did a little bit too. You can see and hear things, and it's kind of wild what your mind will create, what messages it sends in unconventional ways. So that's what this is all about, really, in getting still and quiet. We're not necessarily trying to do this wild, crazy, deep work where we're digging into our shadow, analyzing it, pulling it out unless you really want to. It's about what emerges and then getting curious from there. And then as the, current of light starts to rise after the solstice, where we get more and more time, more and more energy, more and more abilities to explore these parts of self, we can then go into it. But the aim of this workshop, or whatever we call it, class, group, is just to get in the practice of observing, and observing without that bias, of just seeing these parts of ourselves, becoming more aware that other parts of ourselves exist. And then afterwards, that's where the magic happens. This is where we start to decide, what do we do with it? What do I do with this practice? How do I go forward? What can I create and come to understand? So again, if you have other questions for me, please let me know. I'm happy to be interactive with this, of course, and I hope this is helpful for those of you who asked some questions on the subject. Hope you have a beautiful day.